Often when we think about space programs, we remember NASA, Russia, and China, which spend billions of dollars. But how has India, a country more known for its economic challenges, managed to achieve great successes with very low costs? Today, we will examine why India has significantly lower space costs compared to countries like the United States, Russia, and China, and how this country is competing with the world's space powers. At the end of this video, we will arrive at a major lesson that financial shortages and poverty do not always lead to limitations, and on the other hand, large expenses may not always be a sign of success. The first question here is, why does India operate differently in space costs? In recent years, India has achieved significant accomplishments in the space arena. From the successful Chandrayaan missions to the Moon to the Mars orbiter mission known as Mangalyaan, and even new plans for building a space station, all are part of India's impressive space achievements. However, one of the very interesting aspects of these programs is the costs that India has spent for these successes. Compared to the United States, Russia, and China, India's space costs are really low. If we look at this issue more closely, India's space costs compared to other countries are truly astonishing. For example, India spent only $74 million on the Mangalyaan project, also known as MR, or Mars Orbiter Mission, which is significantly less than the $582.5 million that NASA spent on its similar project known as MAVEN, short for Mars Atmosphere and Volatile Evolution Mission. The Mangalyaan mission includes a satellite that was launched into space on November 5, 2013 by the Indian Space Research Organization, or ISRO, and it is the organization's first interplanetary project. It is noteworthy that India is the first Asian country to reach Mars orbit and the first country in the world to succeed in doing so on its first attempt. Additionally, India's Chandrayaan-3 mission was less costly compared to Russia's Luna 25 mission. Luna 25, which reached the moon just 2 days before Chandrayaan-3, cost $133 million. India spent less than $100 million on its mission. Therefore, while American and Russian space projects typically cost billions of dollars, India has effectively achieved great successes with much lower expenses. Economically, India is considered a developing country, but poverty remains a significant challenge. On one hand, India is the 5th largest economy in the world in terms of gross domestic product, GDP. Yet a significant percentage of the population still lives below the poverty line. And there is income inequality between different classes and states. But how has India managed to achieve such significant space accomplishments? The answer to this question lies in India's history and economic approach. From the very beginning of establishing its space organization, ISRO, India faced serious budget constraints. Vikram Sarabhai, the founder of this organization, who established it in the 1960s, had to prove to the Indian government that the space program could be beneficial for a country facing internal poverty issues. It's interesting to know that throughout its history, India has faced many challenges. After British colonization, India had only gained independence in 1947, and its people were still dealing with issues like poverty and a lack of schools and hospitals. Now imagine that Sarabhai at that time had to explain to the government that the space program could be a tool for the country's development and improving people's lives. He believed that satellites could help the country in various fields such as agriculture, communications, and weather forecasting. However, Sarabhai had to keep the budget for space projects as low as possible to achieve this goal. One method to keep the budget of space projects low is to use indigenous technologies. Unlike NASA, which purchases a large portion of its technology from private companies and also adds insurance costs to its projects, ISRO produces all its equipment and technologies domestically. This significantly reduces the costs. Of course, in the 1970s, after India conducted its first nuclear test and international sanctions, especially from the West, were imposed against the country, the situation turned into an opportunity for India's space program. India had to become self-sufficient in order to advance in science and technology, and these sanctions led Indian scientists to develop all the necessary technologies themselves. Another reason for India's success in reducing space costs is that, unlike NASA, India does not build engineering models to test a project before the actual launch. Instead, they build only one model, E, and that model is intended to fly. It is true that this approach is risky, and there is a possibility of failure, but this is a risk that India accepts because it is a government program with a limited budget, and costs must be minimized as much as possible. Another reason for cost reduction is the use of small and efficient teams. This gentleman, whose name is Swami Annadurai, the head of the Mangalyaan and Chandrayaan missions, has stated that the teams for these projects generally consisted of fewer than 10 people, and the individuals within them worked long hours, with overtime. These small groups, due to their interest in the projects and the goals they had, were able to create innovations with limited resources that kept costs down. On the other hand, the limited budget of the projects sometimes forced ISRO team members to find solutions and occasionally think outside the box to create new innovations. For example, in the Chandrayaan project, the initial budget was $8.9 million, which seemed sufficient. However, when it was decided that the spacecraft would carry a lunar probe or moon impact probe with an additional weight of 35 kilograms, they either had to build a larger spacecraft, which would incur extra costs, or they had to remove some equipment to reduce the spacecraft's weight. ISRO chose the second option and reduced the number of booster motors from 16 to 8 and the pressure tanks and batteries from 2 to 1. However, reducing the number of batteries meant that the launch had to occur before the end of 2008, so the spacecraft could orbit the moon for 2 years without encountering a long eclipse that would affect battery charging. As a result, this meant carefully setting a precise schedule for a timely launch. However, some experts believe that India not only made good use of its limited budget, but also moved in directions that other major spacefaring countries have overlooked. One of these directions is using unconventional methods to reach the destination. For example, India used gravity assist to reach the moon, which required less cost and time. In fact, this method helps the spacecraft gain more speed by using Earth's gravity. But India has a historic mission ahead. While in previous missions, Indian astronauts were not present in the spacecraft, now with the Gaganyaan mission, India has taken a big step forward. However, this top-secret mission has finally revealed the names of the astronauts. These 4 individuals, these are Gait Pratap, Shupenjo Shakal, and Prasant Niyur. These 4, Gait Pratap, Shupenjo Shakal, and Prasant Niyur, 4 individuals. But even though the United States, Russia, and China have previously sent humans to space, for India, this is considered a major step. In this mission, all the equipment has been locally sourced. The cost of this mission started at 923 crore rupees, or its equivalent of $1.11 billion in 2019. And it is predicted that this figure will exceed 10,000 crore rupees, or $1.20 billion. I should tell you that a crore is a numerical unit in the Indian numbering system equivalent to 10 million. Well, now if we want to compare the expenses of this country with major countries, the United States spent about $257 billion, adjusted for inflation, on the Apollo program that sent astronauts to the moon. Meanwhile, Russia, or the former Soviet Union, spent about $300 billion on its space programs in the 1960s. China also spent about $1.6 billion on its first manned mission, Shenzhou 5, in 2003. However, India's approach to this project has been very efficient. The Gaganyaan mission is not only about launching astronauts into space, but also pays special attention to the safety of their return. ISRO has trained the astronauts at training centers in Russia, and they are undergoing intensive exercises at the Human Space Flight Center in the city of Bengaluru. These astronauts are not only trained in technical skills, but also engage in fitness exercises, and even yoga for survival in space. Ultimately, India's space program demonstrates that it is possible to achieve great successes with financial constraints and limited resources. Sometimes even budget shortages lead to remarkable innovations. As a result, India has managed to achieve significant successes with simple and efficient designs without wasting time and resources. This is the big lesson we learn from this story. High costs and excessive spending are not always indicators of quality and progress. Instead, success can be achieved through creativity, innovation, and teamwork, even surpassing other space giants.